Foreign policy is a government strategy in dealing with other nations. So we're specifically going to look at how the United States deals with the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Before we start, it's important to remember that as circumstances and time change, the way the U.S. and the Soviet Union interact changes too. In some points, we're going to be sworn enemies. In other times, we're going to be trying to work together. So it's important to know, right, what's going on in the world during each of those particular periods. All right, so the first foreign policy we're going to look at is the Truman Doctrine. Right, this is President Harry Truman here. Okay, this is immediately after World War II. All right, so he passes, creates his program. The initial stage was to help Greece and Turkey rebuild because communism was trying to spread there, hence the cartoon here, right? But the U.S. is trying to kind of prop them up, make them strong so that they can resist communism. So we're looking at over $400 million of American money being pumped into Europe, right? It's eventually going to spread to the rest of Europe throughout the Marshall Plan, but specifically starts with Greece and Turkey, then spreads. All right, so here's a quick little graph showing you the amount of money that we paid, all right, to these European nations after World War II to try and make them stronger, because the idea was that a weaker country, all right, that would have a lot of unhappy citizens, right, would be struggling with poverty, would be very susceptible to communist, to the Soviet Union coming in and helping them turn them into communist nations. Right. The next foreign policy is containment. Now here's an easy way of remembering it. Look at the beginning. Contain. Right. So it starts with a C. Communism starts with a C. Right. We're trying to contain it or keep it from spreading. Right, so the use of using money to keep communism exactly where it is. If we can bolster those struggling countries, right, communism won't be able to spread there. All right, so there's our quote, keep communism where it is. Right. During the Cold War, we had two major alliances. So we'll look first at NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It's formed in the years after World War II, and the whole idea was for collective defense, right? So some kind of defense mechanism against the Soviet Union, who then responds in turn with the Warsaw Pact. So it is a couple years later, but it's basically the Soviet Union and 7 of its satellites, or 7 fellow communist nations that look to the Soviet Union, right? They form their own alliance, so now it's kind of one versus the other. Right, here's a quick, short little map showing you the red is obviously the Warsaw Pact, the blue is NATO. The next one is brinkmanship. All right, now brinkmanship was used by General Dwight D. Eisenhower once he becomes president, and the main idea is that you're willing to go to the brink of war to fight against communism. Right, so you use whatever you have to, short of nuclear war, right, to stop communism from spreading. Here's the big problem. Okay, the one that backed down would be viewed as a weaker nation. So it's kind of almost like playing chicken, right? Whichever country gives in first is going to be the weaker one. So this idea leads to a massive increase in nuclear weapons on both sides, right? All throughout the 50s. Right, so, and then this is a cool little, funny little cartoon, right? You have two armies that are fighting one another with bows and arrows, and behind them they have these big giant nuclear missiles, right? But the caption says, on no account to be used, because the enemy might use them to retaliate, right? So that if one side launched their nuclear missiles, the other side would as well, which leads us to the next one, which is mutually assured destruction. Right, also known as MAD. If one nation used nuclear weapons, the other nation would be forced to as well, which would then lead to, as we know, nuclear war and the end of the world. Right. And then the last foreign policy is known as détente. Right, now this is going to be a period of relaxed tensions between the Soviet Union and the United States, where they're kind of referring to it sometimes as a thaw, because it was the Cold War, so things were icy, right? So there was some steps to try and work together, but mainly the focus was on reducing nuclear weapons, right? Improving human rights all around the world. Our two leaders are President Richard Nixon and Premier Brezhnev. Right. So, and then ultimately, when we look at the end of the Cold War, right, you're going to see how détente ends up kind of teetering out, and Ronald Reagan brings his own foreign policy into play.